Thanks very much for that introduction. It's really good to join PWI again, and to see, it is quite a daunting prospect actually seeing so many track people in one room. Anyway, it's a thick sandwich presentation today. I'm doing the thick parts, Ronnie's doing the intelligent bit in the middle, but I've entitled this Geotechnical Risk and Predicting Earthworks Failure. I'll just, spoiler alert, you can't predict earthworks failure. Anyway, we'll get on to that a little bit. But we're doing our best, and hopefully you'll have a bit more of an insight as to what we're up to. There's always been an intimate relationship between track and earthworks. My view on this is that the track team focus on maintaining alignment, keeping things absolutely as they should be, transitions in the right place, curves in the right place, top and line perfectly aligned. The geotechnical engineer is always looking for the track to go off, so he knows where the earthwork is failing, and that means the track is actually a monitoring device for earthworks. So thank you very much. Much appreciated for all your work in telling us where our earthworks are failing. It's much appreciated. That was a joke, by the way. I'm kind of reminded of the definition of the difference between a mechanical engineer and a civil engineer. Mechanical engineers design weapons systems. Civil engineers design targets. And perhaps the earthworks in this case are the target. I had a little look at the job descriptions. We have track maintenance engineers who are band 3Cs. We also have senior asset engineers, geotechnics, who are band 3Cs. And I had a quick look at the job descriptions. And I'll be honest with you, having worked with track maintenance engineers over quite a while, I would not want to do that job. And I mean this seriously. It is the most responsible, the most complex, the most difficult band 3C role on the railway, I believe. I'm not trying to big you up here. I just think you do an incredible job with the engineering aspects you have to understand, the management issues, the planning, the preparation, the reporting, or the infinite chasing of KPIs. It's just unbelievable. And it was interesting to do a bit of analysis of the wording of the job descriptions to see that the word engineering doesn't actually exist, or engineer doesn't actually exist in the job description elements on the TME's role. I think that's really staggering. And it sort of speaks to the way that the TME's role has developed and grown, I think. I had a chat with Dave Webb about this, actually, in one of the breaks, and he was as shocked and surprised as I was. However, it does appear in the senior asset engineer's description, and it appears actually engineer or engineering appears 14 times. And it kind of makes me wonder, are you getting the enjoyment from your job that you want to as engineers? And how do we up that level of engagement and involvement if you chose an engineering discipline because you enjoy engineering? Are you doing enough of that? Maybe that's something for Dave and the team and John to consider as well. But that's kind of a segue really into the next part. What I wanted to think about, just building on this issue of comparisons between the asset groups, why is it that you've ended up in this position? Dave, I've worked with Dave for many years on North Western Central, and I worked, it's missing from my very poor bio, which was read out at the beginning. I was track earthworks and drainage RAM. I was also, earthworks and drainage RAM, territory earthworks and drainage RAM, and I was also territory drainage and line side engineer as well for 8 years before I came to the technical authority. And Dave came to me one day and he threw the printouts of the drainage standards down on my desk and said, "Julian, these are rubbish. There's no definite statements in here about what you must do. There's no things you can actually measure your success delivery against. How do you exist in this? I'd rewrite the whole lot if I had my way." And I remembered that, Dave. And I think that's a highlight of the difference between civil engineering standards and track standards. We've come from one end of the discipline where we've had this massive base of assets which we haven't really ever fully understood. On the other hand, you've refined the requirements for track over decades, centuries actually, down to a very, very strict and clear set of rules and guidelines you have to work to. And that's a very interesting thing. And I think what we need to do as geotechnical engineers and as track engineers is celebrate those differences and draw on the strengths of both of those approaches. And when we collaborate, recognize where the other person's coming from, draw on their different perspective, and really work together jointly. And I think Ronnie's going to talk about the juxtaposition of track data and geotechnical data in her talk. But I just think, it's my first bid. Let's collaborate more on these things. And let's also think, I've got a problem here. It doesn't seem to be a track problem, but I haven't got a clue what it is. And perhaps just come and have a chat with the geotech RAM, the geotech engineer, and say, have you got any reason why this could happen? And I can think of a few examples where we've got our heads together and we found quite unique problems which we've had to resolve. I think the other thing is that, and touching on what I've said already about predictability, here's a picture of your assets. Aren't they lovely? I'm sure you'll be able to tell me what kind of rail section that is and what kind of clips and even possibly where the ballast came from. So your components, familiar, a limited number of types. Okay, quite a variety, but a limited number and well understood. This is our component of our asset. Unfortunately, it doesn't always look like that. Sometimes it's yellow, sometimes it's black, sometimes it's very brown. That's a kind of reddy brown. It's infinitely variable. And this is one of the real challenges for us, an infinitely variable asset type. How do we manage that? How do we deal with it? How do we get a handle on it? And it's taken ages. When I started, it's been touched on, I started in the Midland Zone track team under Bob Massingham and such other wonderful people as Craig Green and various others who you might have heard of. And I was approached by Avian Evans, who was the chief geotechnical engineer at HQ at the time. And he said, Julian, show me your business plan. So I went, yeah, sure, no problem, Avian. Handed him my business plan. And he scanned down the list and he said, you've got one cutting site on your list of schemes. You've got 30 embankments and one cutting site. And I went, well, yeah, obviously we have a lot of defects with earthworks, a lot of track faults and so on. He said, you do realise, don't you, that cuttings are the single biggest risk in earthworks, don't you? Not embankments. I went, yeah, actually, you've got a point there. Why had I planned so many embankments? Well, because I worked in a team of track engineers, that's why. That's where the track defects show up. When an earthwork's failing, that's where you have the problems. Anyway, we are more enlightened now. I'll just run into the earthworks asset management process. The operating licence network rail required to maintain risks to operational railway, including personnel and members of the public, as low as is reasonably practicable. We have two primary risks that we are looking at. Cutting failure leading to loss of capability gauge, basically stuff on the track that's fallen off the earthworks. Embankment failure leading to loss of track support and geometry, basically earthwork movement, removing support from the formation of the earthworks. Those two risks. And we have a process. You may not think we do, but we do have a process for trying to work out where the worst risks are. And we follow, similar to the structures process, we have our examination, which identifies change of the assets. Those are done between annually and 10 yearly, depending on the hazard presented by the earthwork. Those changes in every examination are evaluated by an engineer to determine whether the changes have been significant between examinations. Further work may be commissioned on the basis of what we found, which will be an assessment, and that will be actually numerical analysis, stability analysis of the earthworks to work out how unstable they are. And then we will put in place some form of mitigation, if appropriate. That might be monitoring. It might actually be prioritized for work on an urgent or emergency basis, or those interventions, maintenance, refurbishment, renewal, may be put into the programme and delivered. And we're normally planning between sort of 5, 7, 8, 9, the more enlightened regions, years ahead. But if we know one thing, plans, best laid plans, change on a rapid basis. We've got 191,000 assets. We divide the earthworks, embankments, soil cuttings, rock cuttings into 100-metre lengths, 5-chain lengths effectively. That each side of the railway is an earthwork asset. And we have 191,000 of them. Going back to my earlier point about where the priorities should be, we've got the most embankments. I was right, you see. I should have been doing most of my work on embankments after all. 54% embankments. We're bound to want to do more work on those because there are more of them. 38% soil cuttings, 8% rock cuttings. What we find, though, is that 49% of our failures are actually in soil cuttings. So this is the overall failure numbers, which means that maybe I ought to be paying a bit more attention to soil cuttings after all. And the embankments, yeah, they're a very close run second or third with the rock cuttings. But when we consider the fact that the rock cuttings represent 8% of the asset group, we actually find that 3.7% of those rock cuttings, of all the rock cuttings, have failed. And that's far and away more than the proportion of soil cuttings or the proportion of embankments, which lag behind. So we do our risk assessment based on those earthworks exams. We identify the hazard, and we recognise that of the 3,000, almost 3,000 failures that we've recorded now in our CIV 185 process, that we need to be focusing our efforts on those assets, the rock cuttings and the soil cuttings, ahead of the embankments. And that may not be good news for you as track engineers, because that's where you will notice the impacts. I think where I want to go with this is to say, we need your help in identifying those locations which are the real priority for intervention on embankments. And we need to do that in other areas as well, but we need to do that on embankments. I'll flick through these next slides because I think I'm perhaps pushing the time a bit. John mentioned PQ plot. Wouldn't it be great if we knew when our assets were going to fail? Wouldn't it be lovely? I mean, you arguably stand better chance with metal and components of working out where it is, but it's still a black art. For earthworks, we designed to 120-year design life, but some of our earthwork assets now are approaching 200 years old. That is a real challenge because we find it really hard to predict when and where they will fail. Then there are huge benefits in understanding this, because the cost of intervention, if you catch it before it fails, is so much lower than if you wait until it has actually failed. So that's the panacea, I think, for all of us in asset management. And we enshrine this in our 5x5 matrix, in which we look at the hazard category, which is along the bottom, which is the likelihood of that asset failing. And we look at the criticality on the left-hand side, which includes things like line speed, complexity, whether it's electrified, whether you're on the approach to a tunnel portal, whether if a train fell off, it would pile into a school at the toe of the embankment, that kind of thing. And that gives us our consequence score on the left-hand side. And what we do is we plan our interventions to try to distribute our interventions into those highest risk locations whilst trying to maintain the asset condition as best we can. But of course we have the weather coming in. CP6 has already been said, one of the wettest years on record. And unlike previous years where we might have had one outlier event, for example, CP5 in 2015 and 16, in the past 5 years, we've had 3 very wet years indeed. And this has a really bad impact on earthworks, which rely substantially on the lack of water or the management of water to maintain their integrity. This is a bit of a busy graph, but in effect, the detail here is that the long-term trend of rainfall and earthworks failures in CP6 is increasing. Those 2 dashed lines show, the top one shows the increase in rainfall, and the lower one shows the increase in earthwork failures. Now, this may be a blip. I'm perfectly prepared to accept that. I believe that climate change is real and we're seeing the evidence for it. But it may just be a blip. But it's been a really grim blip to live through, to be perfectly honest. And I'm sure you will all have experienced some of the pain. We don't know what's going to happen into CP7. Of course, all of this kind of failure has an impact because as we move on, we see that there is an increase or a decrease in risk appetite on the routes and regions. People do not want trains running into debris on the line. And it's worthy of noting the change in the shape of this graph, which lists the number of earthwork speed restrictions in place. If we put Carmont in, we see a pretty much a continuing trend on the left-hand side of the graph. In the immediate aftermath of Carmont, speed restrictions imposed to manage earthworks risk shoot up. And in fact, we find that in summary of the data, we're seeing 3 times the delay costs associated with earthworks now over the last control period. And that is this reduction in appetite for risk associated with earthworks. We don't want to see failures associated with earthworks. High-level statistics, or Ronnie's waiting patiently in the wings. We have, yes, seen a trend towards fewer derailments from an all-time high of 13 derailments due to earthworks, which actually did lead to an improvement notice from the regulator back in 2007. And we have also seen, though, a doubling in the worst failures that have occurred from CP5 26 failures to CP6 54 failures, scoring 50 or more on our scale. We've also seen a 76% increase, again, because of the rainfall we've seen over the past 5 years, from 485 in CP5 to 845 in CP6. So a massive increase in the number of failures. And we need to find a way of managing this. As I said, a trebling in the number of delay minutes. At this rate, and our current rate of spend, it would take us 200 years to renew our assets. And just to finish off this section, mitigations, we put in place geotechnical instrument arrays, inclinometers and slope monitoring equipment. We put in systems which are able to manage the risk of failure and give us an alert and alarm if part of the slope falls down and comes into contact with the train. We undertake the remedial works as part of our planned program by fixing earthworks that are destabilized, and there's a bit of a slope regrade and also some soil nailing there at Crewkerne Tunnel Portal. And Hook Embankment at the beginning of last year, a massive earthworks failure which left the tracks suspended in the air. Could we have predicted that? Well, we're going to come on to that in Ronnie's talk in just a second. That intervention undertaken there by piling the slope. So Ronnie's going to come and talk to us about this kind of thing, which is track defect. Why? Why is it there? What's causing it? What's the root cause? What is the issue? Has it just appeared? Does it reappear? Is it seasonal? Has it followed a period of wet weather? Who knows? And to come back to John's point, how do we predict failure before it happens? Ronnie.
Thanks, Julian. And I'm going to talk about how we as the track and geotechnics communities can better collaborate and use our data better for a better future for both of our assets. So at our current position, we have data from the geotech, drainage, and track assets, as you're all aware, and these range from routine data collection from visual examinations to train-borne surveys and maintenance records. And we've had in the history of railway, I believe, tried to make better use of the data for better asset management. However, we're in 2024, but as Julian mentioned, we're faced with increasing challenges, with increasing number of failures, working within the limited budget that we have, and the increasing vulnerability of our embankment assets failing because of the change in weather patterns from climate change. So how can we do better? And is data part of the equation? And I think the answer is yes, and there's great potential in us collaborating, and it's when we have such close collaboration that we can unleash the full potential of the vast amount of data we hold. So thanks to the continued effort in running track geometry measurement trains, we hold a comprehensive set of data in track geometry. And we're analyzing such data to tell us more about the condition of both the track and the earthwork assets. So one of the algorithms I'm working on is looking at the repeat faults. So as many of you are aware, when an embankment is unstable, track faults typically appear on the surface. And when these get fixed by PUA, these track faults are fixed, and it shows a temporary improvement in the track geometry. But very often, these track faults reappear again because of underlying movements within the embankment being unstable. And it's to picking up of these reoccurrence of track faults and aligning these with our earthworks condition data that we can highlight the high-risk sites for our TMEs and earthworks engineers to put more attention on. The second algorithm is the embankment track quality indicator, which looks at the longer-term deterioration in track geometry and its relation to our embankments. So these algorithms are useful indicators of where we might have higher probability of seeing more faults in the future or more failures, and it helps us uncover high-risk sites that we might not have been aware of. When we develop these tools, we have to carry out robust assurance before putting them into our business practice. And it's exactly at this robust assurance process that the track and geotechnics engineers have to collaborate and lead on. We can validate the tool's prediction of failures against actual failure and fault statistics, or against known high-risk sites from our human engineering judgment that when we validate these, we can fine-tune the algorithm and improve the probability of detection. It's also very important to reduce the number of false alarms, as it's simply not feasible for us to go out and verify every single one of them. When we use these tools, it's good if we can constantly review the accuracy of these tools and continuously improve the tools. Nonetheless, it's important to recognize that these tools are tools. These tools are developed to enhance and facilitate our understanding of the data, but not as like a replacement of us as professional engineers. It's important to communicate such limitation in the tools with the rest of our communities and avoid over-relying on these tools. So when we're faced with sites flagged up as high risk from any of these algorithms, it's important for us to critically evaluate what the tool tells us and to look at the problem holistically as an engineer, and not to just simply believe in what the tool is telling us all the time. On the other hand, it's very important as well to not fall into the trap of a false sense of security. In a sense, these tools might not be 100% accurate all the time, and it might not pick up every single high-risk site in our region or network. And so we have to recognize that there is such a probability that some of these sites might be missed out by the tool. And lastly, when we identify sites of high risk, we can put on more monitoring equipment on there to better target our confined budget and installing monitoring at the correct place. Another area which I think track and geotechnics engineers can work together is to gather more data where the quality matters as much as the quantity. So in the earthworks space, I think Julian will touch on later as well, we've developed a new assessment framework that looks at the vulnerability of our embankments based on our understanding of their geology and their geometry. With this, we can pinpoint the higher risk embankments for closer liaison between the earthworks engineers and TMEs to monitor the condition together. And we can also install more monitoring equipment on those high-risk embankments, such as the remote condition monitoring, which are automatic sensors that pick up movements on the embankments. And with these, we get movement information in the granularity of minutes instead of weeks, where we would have got from traditional track geometry measurement trains. These new monitoring equipment builds onto the luxurious amount of data we already hold, and it opens up more opportunities in the future for a more intelligent analysis of the information about our assets. These RCM is also useful and proven effective in detecting failures and recovering from incidents. An example is when I worked in Wessex on the BKE on the Graceley embankment. Last year, we had a number of rough rides, and the TMEs were having such a difficult time trying to lift and pack every week, causing a lot of stress, a lot of fatigue, and taking attention away from other areas within the same patch that also needed attention. And the embankment kept deteriorating, and we ultimately had to close the line. And then we put on remote condition monitoring on the embankment. And since we had real-time information about any movement on our embankment, together with a full-on action plan on what we do if certain movement thresholds are exceeded, we were in a better position and we had more confidence in reopening the line for traffic. And in the meantime, we did an emergency renewal of the embankment with very minimal disruption to the traffic. And so these new forms of data poses great potential, not only in the immediate term in recovering from incidents, but also in the long term in enhancing our large database about the condition of our assets. These new forms of data and the new decision support tools are good in helping us make informed decisions about our assets. And it is good that these can be made available and visualized on a single centralized platform as presented by Rob earlier on Leica Insights. This will allow TMEs and earthworks engineers to work together in monitoring the track conditions and put control measures in place before the complete failure of our assets. As you might also already be aware, there's a new clause in our track and geotech evaluation standards that mandates an interdisciplinary asset review regularly. There's already some very good practice in some areas with close and mature working relationships between the track and earthworks engineers, and it's now formally in our business process that we have to do such regular reviews, and is indeed in such interdisciplinary asset reviews that the new decision support tools will be useful if they're embedded in to provoke thought and to trigger discussions between engineers on where the high-risk sites are and how we can fix them. So all in all, there's a great potential in the geotech and track communities working together in making better use of the data we already hold, develop these tools based on such data with a robust assurance, and better target sites for the use of our limited budgets in both monitoring and renewing our assets. These new decision support tools are developed by engineers and for engineers, both earthworks and track engineers. And when these decision the support tools are integrated in our business process, that we can work better and even better at our track and geotech interface and safeguard the railway together. Now I'll pass it back on to Julian, who will tell us more about the research that we're doing in the geotech space.
I'm very conscious that I've got -4 minutes. Sorry? -10 minutes. Oh, well. Do you want me to wrap up now?
If that's okay.
Yeah, no, that's fine. We can leave it there. That's fine. Okay.